57 submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 57, honoring the life of David Ferdinand Durenberger, former senator for the state of Minnesota.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise with my colleague, Senator Smith, who will be speaking shortly, to recognize the life of Senator Dave Durenberger, who passed away on January 31st, 2023, leaving behind his loving wife, Susan, to whom he was married over 27 years, as well as his 4 sons, 2 stepchildren, and 14 grandchildren. Last week, I had the honor of attending Dave's funeral at St. John's Abbey in Collegeville, Minnesota. Attendees included governors of both parties. Governor Pawlenty was there, Governor Walz, and Governor Dayton. It was a fitting venue because in so many ways, Dave was St. John's College. He was raised there by his parents, George and Isabel, both of whom were faculty members, and as a student at St. John's Prep and St. John's University, he grew up fully immersed in the Benedictine values of faith, listening, respect, stewardship, and justice. Those values shaped what he did. Shortly after I won my first Senate race, Dave invited me to breakfast, and there's actually a photo of us in the wall when we had that breakfast in that restaurant. And he had a few lessons that he wanted to share with me. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He said that Washington can eat you up, and that too often the value of stewardship is missing. He told me to join the prayer breakfast because he said it was one place where people could talk to each other, nothing would leak, and you could build trust and take a moment and put things in perspective. I did join the prayer breakfast, and 2 years later, as often happens in these things, I was actually co-chairing it with former Senator Johnny Isakson, another very good senator who we will miss very much. Dave also gave me a small book called The Teachings of Jesus and told me to keep it in my office, which I did. It is on my bookshelf, and as he predicted, I did look at it in moments of good and moments of bad. One of the teachings stood out to me as I was reflecting on Dave's life from Matthew 5:16. Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. That's Dave. Through the bluster of Washington, Dave found ways to bring his good work and his belief in public service to the rest of the country. Dave took volunteerism seriously. He saw it in how he lived his life. He paired up with his then Democratic colleague, Senator Paul Wellstone, on the legislation that created AmeriCorps. As a result of their efforts, millions and millions of Americans have gotten the support that they need to better their communities. Dave's devotion to stewardship is also clear when you look at what he did to promote conservation. It was in that spirit that he worked to successfully secure protections for the Boundary Waters Canoe Area, for Voyageurs National Park, and for the Mississippi River. He wanted his grandkids and their kids to be able to experience the natural treasures that Minnesotans have enjoyed for generations. And you simply can't talk about Dave's time in Washington without noting what he did to advance the rights of those with disabilities. From his faith, he carried with him the values of respect for all people. And from his time in former Republican Governor Lavander's office, working on disability issues, he carried with him a steadfast commitment to improving the lives of disabled people across the country. Once, through his work in the governor's office, Dave visited a hospital where he saw patients with disabilities, and in his words, they were warehoused. Most of them, he said, didn't even have clothes on. He knew that as a society, we can and must do better. And in Washington, he saw to it that we did. Through his leadership, as I know you are aware of, Madam Chair, given the leadership torch passed on to you, through his leadership on the Americans with Disabilities Act, he helped usher in a whole new era of disabilities rights, one where people in wheelchairs weren't trapped in their homes as a result of a lack of ramps, one where disabled people weren't systematically excluded from the workforce, and one where the destitute facilities that once motivated him to take action were phased out in favor of community residential treatment and care services. In the years that followed, he found a loving partner in his wife, Susan, whose dedication to mental health reform eventually led her to write her book, The Crusade for Forgotten Souls, a rich history of the campaign to provide dignified care to Minnesotans with disabilities. And Minnesota, back through the time of Hubert Humphrey, when he gave his famous speech in the 1948 Democratic Convention, has always been ahead of itself when it came, and the rest of the country, when it came to people with disabilities. Dave, a Republican, carried on that torch from the other side of the aisle. From the outside, Dave's work often looked like the manifestation of faith in action. But the way he saw it, he was just doing his job, the good deeds, letting his light shine onto others. When Dave left the Senate, it wasn't easy. It's been quite documented what happened. And he could have been bitter. He could have just hidden away and ducked down and not taken responsibility, but he didn't. He apologized, and he kept working. He taught. He would bring his students out here on health care. He was an advocate for health care reform. He still spoke around the state, and he showed us that kind of resilience that only can come when something happens to someone where they have to decide, am I going to sink down further in a valley, or am I going to rise up on the mountaintop and do good again? That included mentoring new senators and new people in public office, which included me. He did good, both while he was in the Senate, before he got here, and then, of course, after he left. He had a higher purpose, and he found a way, one way or another, to improve people's lives. As a senator, as an educator, a husband, as a dad, and as a grandpa. Dave lived every day of his life trying to do good. And he learned that, of course, growing up at St. John's, but he brought it to this chamber and beyond. So today, Senator Smith and I are coming together to introduce this resolution, which we're honored has passed, honoring Senator Dave Durenberger, a man whose higher purpose led our country to a higher ground. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Senator from Minnesota.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to my colleague, Senator Klobuchar, for